Hello, fellow camels. In this Camels Helping Camels session, we'll be talking about strategic thinking. My name is Todd Alessandri. A little bit of background about who I am. First of all, I'm a proud Camel alum from the class of 1993. I am currently an associate professor of international business and strategy at Northeastern University up here in Boston, Massachusetts. My teaching here focuses mainly on strategy and consulting projects, hence why I'm talking to you about strategic thinking. And prior to coming back to academia, when I immediately upon leaving Conn College, my professional experience was in accounting and finance in the Boston area. What we want to talk about today is to provide you with an introduction to a general process that can improve your strategic thinking. This process is very widely applicable and can be used for a number of problems or decisions, both in the business world but also in your personal world and just about any problem you're going to face. We'll start with talking about strategic thinking and defining what exactly we mean. We'll then briefly talk about when strategic thinking is useful, and then I'll provide you with a brief overview of the process that I was mentioning, and then we'll apply it to a real-life example. For example, some of you may be considering changing your job or career. One, it may be as a result of just the stage of life you're in, or two, there may be some recent economic changes as a result of all the changes with coronavirus or other economic changes. And so you may be considering whether it's time to change your job or career. So we'll apply the process I'm going to show you to that question. So what do we mean by strategic thinking? Well, it goes by different names depending on who you talk to: critical thinking, problem solving, other terms. And a wide variety of definitions do exist, but there are some similarities in those definitions. First of all, it typically revolves about a problem or an issue that is being faced by a person or a company. There's usually some goal or objective we're trying to achieve when we're solving that problem or issue. There's usually some degree of uncertainty where we cannot forecast the future. To solve this problem, we typically have to gather some information and conduct some analysis to make a better decision. We usually can consider alternative courses of action. And then finally, we're going to have to make a decision or a judgment. Now, it's important here to recognize that doing nothing is making a decision, right? That's making the decision to not change anything, to stand still and do nothing. And that in itself is a decision, although you may not have done much analysis to get there. But as you can see, there are some key characteristics around the nature of the problem where the process I'm going to talk to you today about can help you solve. Now, why is it important? Well, this comes from the World Economic Forum, where they talked about the top 10 skills in 2020. And if you look, the first two, complex problem solving and critical thinking, are exactly related to the definition I just showed you. And the third one, creativity, that's typically involved in creating a solution or creating alternative courses of action to solve these problems. So these top three skills are highly relevant in the world today in just about any career you're going to enter. And that's what this process will help you work through. Now, when is this type of thinking useful? Well, whenever a decision or a problem you're facing involves an unknown future where you don't know what's going to happen, but you have to make some decision. 2, where you have to consider multiple courses of action and the path or which one is correct is not clear. 3, whatever decision you make has meaningful consequences. It's going to impact either your life or the company, whatever we're talking about, to a meaningful degree. And then finally, to pursue that objective or goal is going to involve the investment of time, money, and or effort. So for example, if you're going to change your career, that's going to involve some time in terms of preparing for that decision, and it's going to involve some effort to change your career and possibly some money if you're going to have to, for example, take a course or go back to school to do so. So these are the times when strategic thinking process I'm going to show you will be helpful to consider. Now, this is what the process looks like, and it's a process that is derived from consulting firms in the business world. But again, it's very widely applicable, both for business problems, but also for just about any of the types of problems we've been discussing. So we'll start at the top. The first step is to make sure you know what problem you're trying to solve. And I know that sounds simple, but in some cases, you may actually be trying to solve multiple problems. So it's important you define the problem first. What's the decision or problem you need to make? The second step will then be to break that problem into manageable pieces, which we call disaggregation. And once you've done so, you then prioritize those pieces and you start solving the ones that are most important first. That helps you, the prioritization helps you kind of keep your goals and objectives in mind. Now that you kind of broken the problem into pieces and you know which ones are the most important, you now design a work plan how you're going to address this problem, these pieces of the problem, and go about conducting the analysis, which is the next step at the bottom. So it's important to first of all think about how you're going to do the analysis and what you need to do the analysis to make the analysis more efficient. Once you've conducted the analysis through information gathering and any other techniques you need, you then want to synthesize your results. What are the insights that you've gained? After considering those insights, you'll then go through and evaluate the alternative courses of action in front of you based on the insights you've learned. And then finally, you'll make a decision and, if necessary, communicate that decision to the relevant parties. Now, it's important to note here, while this problem-solving process looks like it's a cycle where you move from one step to another in this circle, at times you may have to backtrack or go back to a prior step. And so it's not necessarily a continuous circle all done one step at a time, but rather you may go back and forth between steps as you learn more and change, for example, your prioritization, or change your disaggregation of the problem as you start to gain more insight into what you're actually facing. So that gives you a quick overview. What we now want to do is walk through the problem in more detail, walk through the process in more detail with that example of whether you should change your career or not. So again, the first step is let's define the problem. Typically in this stage, you're going to identify that challenge or decision you're faced with. And in doing so, you want to try and be specific, measurable if necessary, and also try to put some time limits on there, because you want to make sure you're making progress and you come to a decision, and you could always keep putting that decision off. And also try to make that solution action-oriented. What are you going to do? What actual steps are you going to take? The final point here is that you want to try to avoid combining multiple problems into one, because that makes it more and more difficult to solve, and actually you may end up not making the progress you need. So you want to try and solve one problem at a time, realizing you may have to go through this process multiple times if you're confronted with multiple problems. Now, for today's session, what we want to think about is this problem of should you change your job or your career. Now, again, we won't necessarily go into what led you to this decision, although that is helpful to think about. But really we want to think about you're considering whether to change your job, which means staying in the same field, but maybe moving to a different organization. Or do you want to change your career entirely? Do you want to move into a completely different field? We'll tackle both of those within this process. After defining the problem, you want to now move to disaggregating the problem. Here you want to break the problem down into its main pieces. The reason we do this is to try and now make it more manageable to solve the problem, rather than looking at it as one big whole. You're now looking at it as a set of pieces, and you're going to address each piece one at a time. With our question about changing your job or career, we want to look at key aspects or key pieces of the problem are: how satisfied or happy are you with your current career, your current job? What's your work-life balance look like? Does that fit with your objectives? What opportunities for growth are there in your current job? What income level have you achieved in your current job, and is that enough for you, for what you want it to be, given your vision or what you want your life to be? And then lastly, the location. Where you are today in terms of the location of your job, is that satisfactory, or do you want to make a move? And that, again, these are all things you want to consider, and these are the key parts. Now, as I note down below, there may be other issues involved. Again, given that we're doing a quick and simple illustration, we're going to move through it quickly, but you would certainly want to think of other aspects of this decision that might come into play. For example, your family, maybe your parents, or maybe your spouse or significant other, and how they factor into that decision, and their career. So for now, we're going to keep it focused on here, but when you do this for a real problem on your own, you want to make sure you are fairly thorough in this disaggregation, where you break it into the pieces that help you solve the whole picture. Once we've disaggregated, we now move into prioritizing. The point of this step is really to focus on those parts of the problem, those pieces that we've identified that are going to have the biggest impact, or that are the most critical to that decisions to help you achieve your objective. This step often requires you to think deliberately about the different objectives you may have, and you may conduct some brief analysis or some brief information gathering to help you in this prioritization, realizing that you may have to go back and disaggregate or revisit your disaggregation as you have gathered some information. But the main point here is to, again, focus on what is most important to solving that problem to fit your objectives. And it also helps you ignore the parts that are less relevant or not important, because again, we want to necessarily be able to make this decision and not waste too much time being inefficient. So if we go back to those 5 factors we talked about, satisfaction, work-life balance, growth opportunities, income, and location, which of these aspects is the most important to you? Prioritize these 5 things in the order that is most important to you and or your spouse, significant other, and that will now help you go through the next phases of the process where you start gathering information. It's at this stage where it may also be helpful to get perspectives of others, because your prioritization is based on your lens or your perspective, and others may have some insights that you haven't considered given where you are or given the nature of your career, and you may not have considered other aspects that are worth thinking about. And so it's often helpful to get some perspective at this point. Once you've now prioritized those pieces, you now want to start to think about designing a work plan. How am I going to go about solving this problem and addressing each one of those pieces in turn? So this step involves creating a work plan for your information gathering and analysis, ideally specifically for each component. And for each of those pieces, or each component of this work plan, you want to envision what the outcome or the deliverable will look like. It will help you be more efficient and help you be focused on what you're trying to do. It's helpful if you set a timetable, and again, that timetable may change, but at least set a rough timetable as to when you want to complete each step by to help you make progress. Now again, if this is a problem in your personal life, that timetable may be more flexible. If it's a problem in your work life or for the company you're working for, that timetable may be more rigid and fixed because the company needs an answer. The last point I want you to think about here in your work plan design is also to make sure you think about ways to combat biases in your own thinking. For example, one of the most common is the confirmation bias, where you have something in your head where you're thinking, I want to change my career. And so you're going to be looking for evidence that's going to confirm what you're thinking, and make you right, rather than being unbiased and looking for both confirming evidence and disconfirming evidence. You also want to be careful of the sunk cost bias. That's another common one where, because you've already invested time and money in the current job you're in, it's often very easy to say, oh, I've invested so much time and money, I don't want to waste that, so I should stay. You've already sunk that time, that money, that effort. That doesn't necessarily mean that should restrict you going forward. So make sure you think about ways of how to combat these biases, and that's often where getting the perspectives of others will help. If we return to your question about whether to change your job or career, that work plan, for example, may involve what steps about reviewing your current job or career. For example, what are the pros and cons of your current job? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? Where are you happy? Why? What is your motivation for considering a change? Again, this may come back to some of your prioritization, but for example, is your work-life balance not what you want it to be? Which leads me to the next step of, once you've considered what are the goods and the bads in your current job and your motivation for for why you might make a change, you first might want to think about, well, are there modifications in your current job that may alter your decision to change your career at all? So step one of your work plan will be think about your current job and career. The next step might be, for example, what is your existing skill set? You want to assess what you're good at. So for your current job, what skills and knowledge represent your strengths? And what are your weaknesses? And what do other people think? Again, it's helpful to get other perspectives. And then are there strengths that you possess that are not being utilized in your current job that you do want to utilize? Okay, and then again, a third component of this work plan will now start thinking about, well, after you've looked at your current job and your current skills, well, what's out there? What might you want to consider? So what other jobs or careers might meet your priorities better? And again, at this stage, you may not know. That's what the whole idea of creating a work plan is, how you're going to find that information out. What aspects of other opportunities or other careers do you find appealing? You may have friends or other con alumni who you see, maybe reading Con magazine, and you say, that sounds really cool. What makes it sound cool to you? Why are you interested in pursuing that further? And then lastly, what skills or knowledge might you need to develop it to enhance your chances in that new job or career? So you want to create a work plan that's going to address and help you answer these questions. Once you've created that work plan, we now move to the analysis phase. Here you're going to go ahead and conduct that data gathering and that information gathering and analyze those to address the questions or issues you've identified. The goal here is to be systematic and thorough. In other words, now that you've created this work plan, now go through the process and make sure you address each component of that work plan. And be systematic so that you can make sure you do it properly, do it efficiently, and make sure you get complete information. It's helpful if you think about the types of information you're going to need and what are those best sources to get it. Now again, it's not necessarily the easiest sources, but the best sources. You want to think about trying to triangulate, which is what we refer to as using multiple data sources around the same question. It helps you determine, and this is one of those things that you can do to avoid bias, because it will help you determine whether you're thinking or you're biased or whether there's independent data to support your analysis. It's also helpful to point out here that based on your information gathering and analysis, you may need to go back and alter your work plan as you learn new information. And then finally, again, just a quick caution, please be sure, try to avoid bias proactively. Seek to test alternative perspectives or alternate hypotheses for how you're viewing things. Make sure you're looking for that disconfirming evidence to make sure you're not just skimming over it because you want to be right. It's also important here to highlight, probably one of the things that I teach my students and my executives most often, is that there's a wealth of information that is strategically relevant to your decision out there if you look for it. That's where the thorough and systematic comes in, is using all available information to help you make a better decision. If we think about your career decision, some of this analysis, for example, might take the form of researching different jobs or careers using multiple sources. So maybe you look up online, maybe you read some books about different careers, maybe you talk to your parents, maybe you talk to your friends. You want to leverage your network here, not just your network though, leverage the networks of your contacts. So particularly using things like LinkedIn, for example, you might use those networks to help you talk to people in a wide variety of jobs and careers to really test some of your hypotheses and see what is it about other careers that might be interesting and might be appealing to you. You want to maybe think about talking to recruiters and headhunters because they can help you talk about what opportunities are available and what you need to do to get there. Of course, one of my favorite ones, being a professor, is contact some of your former professors. I get calls from students all the time, 4, 5, 10 years out, who are thinking about making a career change and want to bounce some ideas or ask me questions about what I know, or maybe leverage my network of students and alumni to help them make a better decision. So seek out CAML alumni actively and use them to try and help you, again, ask questions, don't be bashful, and help you gather the relevant information. And then the last point here in terms of your analysis is you may want to think about refreshing your skills and knowledge, and where do you need to maybe top up some skills and use, for example, things like Coursera or online courses or even grad school to think about how you might want to, what skills do you need or do you think you need for this new career, and start analyzing that aspect of this decision as well. And I want to reiterate here again, throughout this whole process, while as you're considering your career decision, think about where you can find relevant information to that decision if you look for it. Don't be bashful and reach out to people. And most people I know of are very happy to talk to you about careers or introduce you to other people to help you make a better career decision. After you've done the analysis, it's now your turn to synthesize. And here what we basically want to do is start to summarize what we've learned along the way and identify key insights. Okay? It's important that for each of the pieces of analysis you do, you summarize along the way and identify key takeaways. But then at this stage of the process, you also want to try and step back and see the big picture. As you start to look at the various things you've learned, what patterns do you see? What consistent answers do you keep coming across that are going to help you maybe provide solid support for your next step? And also at this point, you want to start thinking, going back to your problem statement and your prioritization step to help you frame these insights and help you start to close the loop here and start to move towards a decision. In terms of, if we start thinking about your career decision, we think about synthesis, now that you've done this research, go back to that question about how you feel about your current job and career. Now that you've done all that analysis, does that make you more or less excited about changing your job or career? Maybe you may realize that your job or career that you're considering leaving is actually very good and you just need to make subtle modifications. Or maybe you found out information that makes you confirm you really want to leave. So again, what are the insights? What types of careers or jobs seem most interesting? And most importantly, as I put in bold here, why? What is interesting about them? That's important to know. Do you need to develop new skills or new knowledge? Right? What did you learn from your information gathering? And then another key point to think about in the synthesis process is, what are the trade-offs you may have to make? For example, if you really want to have a higher standard of living and live in a big city, well, you may have to trade off, for example, something in work-life balance for a while to get there, because you may need to earn more money to do so. Or if you're thinking about starting a family, well, you may have to trade off location to allow you to have a better work-life balance. This is where the synthesis and those broader patterns come into play. After conducting the synthesis, and you now have sort of stepped back and thought about the insights you've learned, we now want to move on to the evaluation phase. Based on what we know, what courses of action can you choose from? And here it's important to identify at least more than one course of action. And I always like to at least have 2 to 4, because by having multiple different courses of action, it forces you to weigh or consider the trade-offs between them. And so try to identify 2 to 4 different jobs or careers you're interested in. And one of those might be staying where you are, but at least have 2 to 4 different options to think about and consider. Right? And you want to evaluate each one of those alternatives based on those criteria that you identified as most important. Go back to your prioritization and use those criteria to help you solve the problem and choose the course of action that best fits. And part of this step involves looking at the advantages and disadvantages of each of those alternatives. So for your career decision, what did you come up with? Is it time to move on, or do you want to stay? You want to consider prioritizing based upon the criteria that's important to you. If your answer is, I think I want to stay, well, what steps might you take to improve your situation? That's part of the evaluation process. What needs to be done? If it's time to move on, what are the best options? And it's always helpful to consider what challenges or risks you might envision as you start to move forward, whatever you choose. And then the final step in the process is making that final decision. And this is often the hardest one, because now you actually have to make that decision and move forward. And so here you're going to select the course of action that best solves the problem according to your criteria you've specified. If you've been rigorous throughout this process and been systematic, it's a lot easier to make that decision because all the information gathering and analysis and synthesizing you've done are going to make you more comfortable making that decision. Not to say it's easy, but you're going to be more comfortable. And if if we're talking about a problem or an issue you're facing in your organization where you work, you probably want to develop and document some supporting arguments and develop some evidence that you want to share with the relevant audiences to convince them of this decision. Additionally, it's worth thinking about communicating the next key steps to pursue this course of action. If you're working in a company, that's identifying those key steps. If you're thinking about your career decision, that might just be making notes to yourself what you want to do next. And also make note of the potential risks that you might have to monitor. In terms of your career, what we'd ultimately, again, hope for is that you're able to find something right in the middle here, something that you're passionate about, where you have some skills that fit, but also fit your personal and family needs. And again, that's the ideal. You may not get there right away, but as I often talk to students as they're considering changing their jobs or careers or moving forward in their careers, is you may not be able to get to that center objective in your next move. But if you just keep moving in that direction, hopefully you'll eventually get to that point where you've found that spot where you have met all those needs together and you're in a career that is meant for you and it's going to keep you happy for the long term. With that, I just want to offer you some concluding thoughts. First of all, again, this is a very general process that I'm presenting to you today, but it's very useful across a wide variety of problems and challenges you may face. So I encourage you to use it both in your personal life and in your work life. It's important to try to be systematic, and even though that process may seem like it's overkill at times, you might still want to follow that process to make sure you're being thorough and make sure you don't miss anything. You want to seek out and use strategic information wherever possible. And again, the bigger the problem, the more important it is to be systematic and seek out this information. Try to be conscious of those biases, especially the confirmation bias. We all like to think we're right, but it's important that we make sure that we're not just avoiding finding out we're wrong. And make sure you consider multiple courses of action before choosing one. Only looking at one course of action really isn't solving the problem because you haven't really been thorough. And then lastly, the greater the consequences, the greater uncertainty, and this is something I haven't talked about yet, but I want to leave you with this parting thought. The more impactful this problem is, the more you want to try and think about, are there ways to create some flexibility there? Can I, for example, do something that maybe if this was the business world, for example, I might do something where I might try to defer action and gather more information until I'm pretty sure that this risk is worth taking. If we're talking about changing your job or career, this flexibility may be pursuing additional skills that will help you choose from multiple careers that maybe look interesting to you. So you want to try and keep that idea of the greater the consequences, the greater uncertainty. Try and preserve flexibility or create more flexibility where possible. With that, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion about strategic thinking. I want to thank you for your time, and I wish you luck on your journey. And on the first slide, my email is there. I just would invite you, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, my name is Todd Alessandri, and I'm at Northeastern University. And I just want to say thank you for your attention, and go Camels.